Freud and said, hey, post a link, find a venue, start a talk. Here we are. I'm not really a presenter or anything, or I'm just kind of the organizer for this. So thanks for coming out and signing up. I contacted Ryan here from PHP University, and he said we'd love to speak. So hopefully you guys enjoy it.
Wait, have you guys been having regular PHP meetups or?
Just a Laravel one. So.
Nice. Oh, awesome. Well, if you have a Laravel one, you have to have a PHP one. Yeah. Is anybody happen to listen to the Sound of Symfony podcast? Yeah, okay. I mean, if I asked it to like a Symfony group, I would expect like more people. We were actually just talking about that, like, you know, what do you do if there's like all these different frameworks, but anymore, and that's kind of what this is about. Like anymore, it's like, there's like Laravel and Symfony and like Drupal and all these things, but it's really starting to fall under an umbrella that's bigger than the frameworks, right? And we were trying to think of a name for this. If you have some name for that umbrella, it's actually like Magnus on the podcast. Like trying to think of a name. He's like going to use it in his company to like kind of market themselves. But he sort of called it like sort of modern PHP, right? And we're all using it, sharing components, using Composer. Just that whole umbrella is really something that puts us all together. So that's why we're like, at Symfony, people are like, we don't really need or shouldn't necessarily go for Symfony meetups. If there are some, that's great, but PHP meetups is really where it should be at because we're all sharing stuff anyways.
Yeah. So I just want to say thanks to Reese for hosting.
Oh. Yeah, it's welcome you all. Like if this is the first time, welcome, and you are more than welcome to come here. We frequently host so many meetups here. So this seems to be so far the first biggest event of this year. Usually for all meetups, like 8 people, at least 8 or 10 people sign up, but only 3 or 4 show up. And I'm so happy you all guys. Like we buy 4, but it goes west. So I'm so happy today. All of you can make it today. So,
thank you. Thank you. And sweet space.
Yeah,
congrats on finishing it, except for the painting over there.
Oh, that's what's different, right? The cleaned out.
Yeah. So it was perfect.
Please continue.
All right, and then usually they say if anybody has any jobs or anything or wants to do a quick introduction, this is the time to do it. So my company's recruiting PHP developers. I work in North American Bank Card. We're a processing company. We also have Pay Anywhere, which is our mobile side. Definitely another PHP flavor. So if you guys are looking, reach out to me afterwards. I'll give you a business card and chat about it. Other than that, anybody else?
Yeah, so I lead the software engineering team at Quizzle. We're based out of Detroit. We're also hiring PHP developers. We use Symfony. So we're looking for PHP developers and for QA, software engineers sometimes. So, and also, if you guys want us to host a meetup, that's also cool too. So
I guess we'll join in. So, can't let 2 people go by. But we got a bunch of folks here from print sites, and we have we're hiring PHP developers and Drupal developers, and we use Drupal and Symfony in different parts of our product offering. So if you want to meet up with any of us over here, we'd love to chat with you.
Awesome.
My name's Rich Martino, and
everybody's hiring.
It's a community event, right? We're getting to know where people work anyways.
I'm not really hiring. I went to school for IT, then I volunteered for a long time. Now I'm doing IT work for a couple nonprofits, and I've been making a couple projects with PHP. And wondering if somebody afterward might want to meet up with me just to do a code review. I haven't been doing my research. Let me know after.
Awesome. Anybody else? Anybody else want to tell us any random facts? Doesn't have to be a job thing. Say hi. You're recruit for something completely different. All right.
I'm sorry.
Go for it.
I forgot the buy part. So as for those who don't know, we are a big on mobile apps development, both iOS and Android. So we are always in the need looking for those people, and also of course PHP and WordPress. So I'd consider that also a part of your list.
It's a good time to be a software developer. Yeah. Cool.
Detroit's on the move.
It is actually. So on that like random side thing is I'm emailing back with Anne Sophie, who's the person that organizes the Symfony conferences, and we're trying to convince her to actually have one in Detroit, which she's actually really open to. And then the only question was which year we do it in. She tends to plan things last second in the U.S. because they're in Paris. So that's something. It's great for me to hear like of companies that are using Symfony here, because that's like all the more incentive. It's like, yeah, Detroit would be a great place. Like big airport, like lots of stuff happening here. I know of like tons of companies that are using Symfony, which especially in the US is not always the case, because in the US, like everybody uses every framework ever, right? So like we just like spread ourselves over across that. So so that's very, very cool for me. So, you know, stay tuned for that. If that like really piques some interest of yours, and you're like, you could have it like in our building or something. We have the space for it. Like, let me know. That would only help things along. All right. So, anyways, let's get into stuff here. So, today I'm going to talk about Symfony. Symfony 3, Drupal. Drupal's going to be like right at the end, but by the time you get there, you'll see why. You'll realize that I was talking about Drupal the whole time. It'd be like the big surprise. Well, not a surprise anymore. So real quick, I actually live on the other side of the state. So to be able to come to my home state, I'm from Saline. I don't have to say basically from Ann Arbor. I'm from Saline. So this is my home area. So to be able to come here and do a meetup, talk about Symfony is really, really awesome for me. I am the lead for the Symfony documentation, so that's how I'm related to Symfony. I also work on the core team. I work a lot on making the developer experience better for Symfony. And then my main thing I work on during the day is campuniversity.com. How many people have heard of Camp University? Yeah, good. Like actually most people, which is like good and bad, right? You like in some ways for your ego want every name to go up, and like for like marketing purposes you want like nobody have heard of it. So so we're Camp University, for the few people that don't know, it's basically aimed at intermediate advanced learning of PHP. We're niched in PHP so that we can actually bring like that really good kind of code schooly experience to the stuff that we actually want to know. So videos, and not across everything yet, but we're working really, really hard on getting challenges like this across the site. And the new challenges are going to have stuff like a terminal, like browser editor, because sometimes when you need to do something, right, it's like you need to actually run this terminal command, take some output, throw it into a file, go to a page, submit a form, hit submit, see validation errors come out, and that's when the grading is going to kick in and be like, yeah, you got it right. So, I mean, that's kind of the challenge with the way we develop. It's not just like fill in this file and hit submit and hello world. So, you know, keep an eye on us and see what we got. I'm really excited about that stuff. Anyways, most importantly, hi, Leanna. It's my wife, Leanna, over there. You haven't met Leanna before. She's delightful. She does all of the kind of design behind Camp University and a lot of the voice work as well. And you want to tell us what you have over there?
I have a really cool swag. We've got t-shirts from Camp Labs. We have flat balls. Get ready for spring. I'm sure we'll have all the guys practice. So this is important to have to be ready. We got some fun notebooks, and most importantly, temporary tattoos. And if you guys want to plaster yourselves in them, or if you have children, they look great on kids. There's little dinosaurs on some of them, which is pretty appealing. So definitely.
They're super dorky. They're awesome. One's I Heart PHP, and the other one's a picture of a dinosaur, which is like our secondary logo. So you guys, we just got back from a conference. We have like extra swag, so feel free to take as much as you want over there. All right. Anyways, let's get into stuff. So what is Symfony? And by the way, I'm not gonna don't be like, oh, I know what Symfony is. This is gonna be really slow. We're gonna cover some of the basics, but then we're gonna kind of move into things here. So Symfony is two things. One, it is a framework. So think like starting project, right? I like hit download, and here's like this directory structure, and I just start coding in it, and things work, right? Just like WordPress or Drupal or anything else. So it is that. And it's also component libraries, like individual tiny pieces that you can bring into like whatever project, a Drupal 7 project, a WordPress project. You can bring that across anywhere in PHP. You can bring one of these 40-ish. The number goes up all the time. It actually went up like last week. We added a cache component, which I didn't even realize until like a week later. Reasonably decoupled libraries, so you can basically bring them in. Maybe they bring in like one or two of their friends, but reasonably decoupled libraries. And really kind of a backdrop to this whole presentation is like this stuff is used all over the place. So like Easy Publish here, there's Laravel, there's PHP, Drupal, Composer, Magento, Doctrine, Silex. So these little bits and pieces are used everywhere, which has started to make Symfony. That's why it's kind of important to think about those two things, because there are a lot of Symfony like full stack developers, and I know that there's some in this room, and there are other people that are just kind of using Symfony almost an accident. Actually, I went to Atlanta PHP user group once. I happened to be in town, so like I got up in front for like this 5 minutes thing just to say like, here's what to expect with Symfony 3. And afterwards, the guy said like, oh, that was really cool. Like I never knew what Symfony was. I just know that I see it all through my project. I was like, seriously? I was like, yeah, it's a thing. It's a big framework thing. It's not just a thing like sitting in your project. So some of my favorites. How many people are using the var dumper component? What version of Symfony are you guys on?
Wait.
Well, start using the dump function. Yeah, you use it. Okay. Yeah. How many? So I should have asked how many people are using the dump function. You might not realize it comes from the var dumper component. So this is just a component that you could just use later tonight in your, I don't know, like legacy, crazy, weird project that you're on, or your WordPress project, your Drupal 6 project. You know, just throw a compose.json in there, grab Symfony/var dumper, and it's just a debugging tool. It's just like var dump, except you dump and you get an output that looks like this. It's just like var dump on steroids. Even if you have xdebug installed, it's way better than that. And you can like fold stuff over, and it doesn't have the recursive problem, you know, like spinning forever because it dumps forever. And you know what? If you dump something and you end up running it from the command line, it colorizes itself to the command line. It detects where it's being dumped from, so it doesn't like dump a whole bunch of HTML to your command line. So it's just cool stuff, right? So you can just bring that in and start using it. Another one's the process component. If you have this situation, we happen, and what we do, we run a lot of like external processes. So this is a way to do that. It's really simple. Set timeout. You can run it like asynchronously behind the background, so you can be like start and then go like do a bunch of work over here, like mine for Bitcoins, and then like go back and be like, are you finished yet? And you can send it like signals to like kill it and things like that. Things that are possible in PHP with those proc underscore functions, but really difficult to actually pull off and use in any decent way. Oh yes, yeah, I even had an example of you mining Bitcoins inside of here while it was finishing. Another one, Finder, Symfony Finder. So if you have the problem of needing to look into a directory and find files, as we all know that's like really irritating. It's like something you have to do like once a year, and then you hate yourself that you have to do it. That's not a problem. So here we're going to look for files, so not directories, files. Start.php, less than or greater than 2 depths, only go 2 levels deep. Greater than 1 kilobyte that have been modified since 1 hour ago. And there's a famous example online if you just Google for like Symfony Finder S3, because this works with streams. So ultimately you pass it, actually don't, oh there it is, in, that's what I was looking for. And then in is where to look in. So if you can pass it any stream here. So somebody wrapped this, basically created an S3 stream wrapper, and they passed the S3 path in there. Now it's not necessarily all that performant because you're like doing a whole bunch of stuff in S3, but you can do this whole thing. They pass it like an S3 stream wrapper thing there, and boom, they were doing this across their buckets in S3. So it's just cool stuff like this. This is another one. It has no dependencies, so you can just integrate into your weird project later tonight, and it'll work out. So overall, like the philosophy with Symfony has been and always will be like quality first. Like don't mess up your project. Do things really, really well. Be the low building blocks of the project so that other things can build on top without being shaky. Now, sometimes, actually, I don't remember. I was here like a month and a half ago for a Laravel meetup, which was a different talk, but there might be little bits and pieces that are the same. So I can't remember if I mentioned this then or not. How many people have like heard of or like read about or know what I'm talking about with like the simple versus easy philosophical thing? You remember? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the idea, you can Google like simple versus easy. So like the definition of simple means that if you sort of look at it, it makes sense. So you can like plumbing, right? You're like, it goes here, it goes here, it goes here, and then it goes there, and then it goes here. I can kind of understand the parts when I look at it. And then easy means close at hand. So like I push a button and it's just done. So very easy to get that. So simple and easy are 2 separate things, and kind of philosophically, the goal is always to make things simple first and then easy later. So an example of doing the opposite of that would be like, look, dude, all you have to do is call this function, and it just does everything. But if you like dig underneath, it's just like one big procedural thing. It's not simple. It's like incredibly hard to follow, and it's the classic situation where when you need to extend it later, you're screwed. So the simple thing would be like, no, let's make these small individual parts. But if you just stopped right there, then you'd be like, oh, it's so simple to use my library. Just call this function, pass that result to this function, pass that result to this function, blah, 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 and you have 40 lines of code to get it done. It reads really simple, but it's not easy. But if you do the simple first, and then you get the easy, which is the most work, then you sort of have the best of both worlds. So Symfony being quality first basically means like simplicity first, like building things correctly. But early on in Symfony, we suffered from the reputation of being too hard. Just looked like a lot of code and a lot of long things to get work done. And I think, even to this day, Symfony has that reputation of like being hard to learn. And it's just not actually true. I mean, the one thing I will say is that, and this is actually something that is even getting less true with the newer versions of Symfony, but the one thing that will trip you up if you're trying to learn Symfony is object-oriented stuff. If you don't know object-oriented stuff, then it's going to be harder to learn Symfony because Symfony uses object-oriented coding, and that's something that they don't bend on. Like, we're going to do object-oriented coding, and we're going to do it correctly. We're not going to use static variables. We're not going to use global context. We're not going to cheat, basically. We're going to do it correctly. So that is the one thing. But, you know, like a lot of things in Symfony, if you put in the effort on that thing, it's going to pay off because really, this day and age, you need to be a good object-oriented developer anyways. But other than that, as you'll see, I think that reputation of Symfony being hard is just not true anymore. So if we go from Symfony 2 to Symfony 3, like, what are we looking at here? What's the difference between those? Is it features? Well, yeah, it's totally features. We added a whole bunch of features between those. But the most important one from my perspective is the developer experience. It's just a lot nicer. It's a lot easier to use Symfony than it used to be. So just for example, like this is a hello world. So if you, it of course can be smaller than this, but if you just downloaded like a new Symfony project in Symfony 2 and you did like the classic hello world, then this is what you're looking at here, however many files that is to kind of get that job done. And Symfony 3 just looks like that. And this seems silly, especially for people that have used Symfony before, but there's a perceived complexity when you show somebody something you did and it has a lot of files, and it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. And literally, I could show you 100 lines of code in one file, and take that 100 lines of code and split it 10 lines each into 10 files, and then show you the same thing, and it would look harder, right? So there's been a lot of work that's gone into like basically taking that away. Like, what are unnecessary files and unnecessary like directories that we need to do to make things seem simpler for beginners, and also to make our job like faster too. Like, we used to do this thing where you'd have like an extra directory here, like src / your company name / bundle name, and now it's just like src / bundle name, just like little stuff like that. And so another big, beyond like just doing things well, another big philosophy of Symfony is like, don't break things on upgrade. So Symfony 2.3 was released in May 2013, Symfony 2.8 in November 2015. So that's 20 months, it's almost 10,000 commits to the core, and you can upgrade without breaking your app, which is not an accident at all. A massive amount of work goes into that. Like, that's actually, it sucks because it's super duper boring, but that is what makes Symfony and its ecosphere special. Like, this kind of thing, actually following semantic versioning, you know, where this number hasn't changed, so backwards compatibility should not be broken, is not something that's really been done in PHP before on large projects. Usually it's like 2.3 to 2.4, screw you, you know, you have to like rewrite your application. So a massive amount of work has gone into Symfony to make that possible, which means you can keep developing your application and keep going. And these, by the way, are when the new features are added. So 2.3 to 2.4 adds features. 2.4 to 2.5 adds features all the way through. So you're getting all the new features that are coming out. You don't have to wait till 3.0 comes out to get the new features. So in Symfony 3, because the number changed, we finally break backwards compatibility. But we tell you exactly what you need to change in your code to be able to go up to Symfony 3. So again, it's the same thing. When we get to that backwards compatibility break, do we kind of just make you rewrite everything, or do we actually give you a smooth path that you can actually take your business through to get up to there? And the way we do that is via these deprecated warning calls. So people that haven't used Symfony before, this is the Symfony Web Debug Toolbar down here. It's this awesome thing that shows up on every page, gives you all kind of debugging information. And starting in Symfony 2.7, one of the things you get is it just tells you, like on this page load, there's 25 deprecated calls. There's 25 old function calls you're making that if you upgrade to Symfony 3 today, will not work. Those will be gone. In fact, the only difference between Symfony 2.8 and 3.0 is that it's not new features. They just removed all the deprecated stuff. So if you're on Symfony 2.8, you have all the same features as 3.0. It's just a staging area for you to remove all the deprecated calls. So hey, there's 25, so I'm gonna go fix some. So if you click this, it'll tell you what the deprecated calls are. So I'll go fix some, this goes down. Eventually, when I get this down to 0 on all my pages, then I just go to Symfony 3, and my app keeps working. Oh yeah, there's a picture of, if you clicked into it, kind of like what it looks like. So I said earlier, like, this is really what makes Symfony special. Unfortunately, it's like boring. Like, I wish I could show you like things like, oh, and then like you type this code and you get a Ferrari. you know, but it's not like that. I mean, it's really kind of pro stuff where, you know, developers need to get their job done, and we just need to stop breaking our applications. So that's kind of like done with the philosophy thing. So let's build a brand new Symfony 3 app. So first thing you're gonna do is you're gonna download the installer. Symfony has like an installer. You don't have to do this step. It has like a little binary file that like helps you download new Symfony projects. So especially if you like boot up more than one, it's kind of handy. I start projects like 4 times a day, so for me this is awesome. So it's just some code here, and basically you end up with an executable called Symfony. It's not Symfony. It's just a little glorified downloader. Laravel has the exact same thing. And then the second thing you do is we're going to download a new project skeleton, and then we just use the Symfony executable for that. Symfony new, directory name. Aquanote is a directory name for a project we do in one of our screencasts. And downloads it, and there you go. And it basically makes that Aquanote directory, which is this, you know, just basically your project skeleton. And by the way, in the previous thing, probably most people know like the whole little cute progress bar and stuff. That's the Symfony console component, which is like one of the most popular Symfony components. It's used in Laravel, it's used in Composer, it's used all over the place. So you can use it in your own little single file apps, you know, command line script apps to get some nice nice output, colored output, tables, lists, that kind of stuff. All right, so we basically at this point just have a collection of files. And the last thing we do is start the built-in PHP web server. How many people use the built-in PHP web server on a day-by-day basis? How many people have used it at least a couple times? Yeah, used a couple times. Yeah, okay, good. It depends on your situation, right? Like if you start up a lot of projects, it makes more sense. If you have like one big project at work, it makes less sense. So for those of you that have not used it, PHP, by the way, has its own built-in web server. It's not something that's going to get, not something you'd use on production. But as far as if I just send you a bunch of code, you can just run, you guys remember the command?
-s.
Nice, S. PHP, so it's not exactly this. This is a wrapper on it. It's PHP space dash capital S and then an address like localhost :8000. If you run that in any directory, boom, you have a web server in that directory. And so it's just the easiest way to just start demoing stuff or just get a new project going. Obviously, for like me as a trainer, it's like changed my life. Like, thank God, I don't have to start a tutorial by like walking you through like Apache or Nginx virtual host nightmare. So Symfony has a wrapper around that. It's bin console server : run. And for people that have not used Symfony before, this bin console is just a physical file in your project. So this guy right here, it's a bin console file in there, and it's just a way to interact with your Symfony application. And it has like lots of debugging tools and things like that. So for Drupal people, that's equivalent to Drush, which itself is kind of being replaced. And then Laravel has one called Artisan, right? Yeah, Artisan. And voila, that's what we have right here. So just ran that built-in web server. This spins us up at localhost :8000, pop up localhost 8000. There's our homepage. There's our web debug toolbar. So basically, we downloaded a project, we spun up the built-in PHP web server, and we have a page going. So there's slow amounts of friction to get this guy started. All right, so how can we actually build our first page? And this is gonna be the fundamental stuff that is the same across everything, like Symfony and Drupal and even like Laravel, which does it slightly different, but it's basically the same thing. So to create a page, we're going to just create a single file. And that was an important thing, especially for beginners. Like if you want to create a page, I want you to touch a single file. There are other ways to do it, but this is the easiest way to do it. So you're going to spin up this file called genus controller. This lives in your src directory. That's where you spend about 99% of your time coding. Create this file called genus controller. You create a controller, and you put a single function in it. And the important thing here is this annotation spot here. So I'm going to talk about that actually piece by piece by piece. But basically, we touch one file, and we actually get some rendered page. In this case, actually, really, really simple page. So the steps to actually creating a page are always the same thing. First thing you do is create a route, which is basically the URL to your page. And if you've used a framework, any framework before, you're like, yeah, that's just this in that framework. Silex, even Drupal 7, right? This is basically like hook menu to get a URL, to create a route to the page. So you're gonna create a route to your page. In Symfony, you can do this in like 55 different formats, but the format that we recommend is annotations, which is basically the PHP comments here, because it ends up putting your code and your comments right next to each other, which for most people is kind of nice. The company I was at last week, they had like 2 groups that were like battling it out between annotations and YAML. So there's no performance difference. It's just like it's like one of those things, because there's no technical difference, like there's nothing that can stop the infighting. The war will go on. So it's preference. So in this case, @route, that's the annotation /genus /curly brace genus name, which is going to match anything. So it's a wild card system. And again, every framework has a wild card system that looks like that. So this will match /genus /star. And the syntax might be different in some other framework, but it's usually that exact same thing. So step 1 is just to have a URL to your page called a route. And the nice thing is that, of course, that curly brace genus name, curly brace, is going to pass as an argument to your controller. So I know it's a little bit dark, but that's $sign genus name. So if I go to /genus /octopus, then it's going to pass the value octopus for $sign genus name there. Okay, so we have a route. Step 2 is to create a controller, which is the function that builds your page. So you hear the word controller a lot. Controller is the function that builds your page. Super straightforward. And in Symfony, you just create that function, and you can have it do whatever the heck you want to. The only rule is that your controller must return a Symfony response object. And of course, just like the matrix, if you like learn enough about Symfony, even that's not true. But let's just pretend that that's true 100% of the time. That's what you're going to see like 99% of the codes. So route, controller, your controller, you write, you return a response object. And we don't really care what you do inside the controller. If you want to make a curl request out to a Java application and get a whole bunch of like JSON or HTML, and then fire that back inside of a response object, that's cool. Simplest Symfony app ever. It's just controllers with one line that make a curl request. So you can do whatever madness, craziness inside of here that you want to. And that's half of Symfony. That's it. There's not a lot of layers. It's the route controller response system. And that's the only thing that Symfony really forces on you. And even that, of course, you can pull that apart and do even weirder and crazier stuff if you want to. But route controller response, half of Symfony is down. And it works just like any other framework does. So that's really, really nice, because when people are initially learning Symfony, it's not like this one-off thing. I hate when you're like learning something and you're like, okay, this is like very blah, blah, blah framework specific. Symfony has moments of that, but by and large, when you're learning stuff, it kind of translates to other things. So the second half of Symfony then is all about services, which are objects that do work. So as opposed to, so of course, you can totally bastardize this. And if anybody's working a legacy project that has objects, then you'll know what I'm talking about. But philosophically speaking, there's sort of supposed to be 2 different types of classes. There's classes that don't really do work, they just hold data. So they're like model objects, sometimes they're called data transfer objects. So it'd be like, I have like a product object, right? And it's like a name field, and a price field, and a description field. And with model objects, they don't do any work. Like I wouldn't want to add a method to my product that says like, send the user an email. That's too much for it. It's just meant to be kind of dumb and hold that data. And the property of those objects is that it makes sense to be able to have 50 of them at once. So if you want to like show 50 product objects on a page, it's perfectly legal to like create 50 product objects. It makes sense to be holding 50 product objects in your hand. So that's the first class of objects. The second class of objects are the exact opposite. They don't hold data or state, if you want to use that word, it's not trendy. They don't hold data, they just do work. So an example would be like a mailer, right? The class that sends emails. It doesn't have like any data on it, it just sends emails. Maybe you pass it like the to, the from, and the subject and to a send method, and it sends that email away. And a property of that second type of objects, which the second type is, of course, the services I'm talking about, is that you really don't need to have multiple of them rolling around at any time. If you want to send many emails, right, you just get one mailer and you just call send on it over and over and over and over again. So, in anything you do, just try to keep those separate. Every time you cross those lines, like a future you or a future teammate is going to be pissed at you. Because they're going to be like, why is this like product object have like this crazy method in the middle of it that does all this kind of work? Just keep those kind of things separate. So the second half of Symfony is all about those worker objects. And Symfony comes with a whole bunch of these out of the box to help you. Because remember, like the whole thing we started with was just like route controller response. And I'm purposely like making this to seem boring. Like Symfony's first half is very underwhelming, route controller response. And remember, we don't care what you do inside of your controller, but we give you a whole bunch of useful objects, services, that you can choose to use if you want to help you get your work done inside of the controller. Again, to go back to the stupid mailer example, if you need to send an email on a controller, you can do that yourself, of course, or you can use the mailer object if you want to and have it do some of the work for you. So in Symfony, we have all of these useful objects that are just floating around, and the first thing we do is we give them nicknames. Okay, so serializer, logger, mailer, twig, templating. And then we stick them inside of a big object called a container. There it is. That's the actual container right there. That's what it looks like. It's blue. And these are basically like the nicknames, but there are objects attached to them. And that's it. So this container is a God object in Symfony, and it's basically a glorified associative array where the key is the nickname of the service, like logger, serializer, templating, and the value is the object. So if I give you the container, you can be like, oh, sweet container, could I grab out the logger object? I'll give you the nickname, and you will give me back the logger object. So if I gave the container, the only method on container is get. Container arrow get. Give the nickname, it gives you back whatever object that is. Okay, and then you call whatever methods are on that object. So getting things out of the container is super simple. Aha. So inside of our controller here, so remember before we were just returning like hello world or something like that, returning the response object. So now we're actually going to use something from the container. So when you're in your controller in Symfony, because it knows that you probably want access to these useful objects, it makes the container available to you on a container property. If you want to nerd out on how that works, you can ask me afterwards. But just take it by faith. If you're in the controller and you have access to the container property, which is that container, which remember has the all-important only one method, has other methods actually, but the only one you guys care about, the only one I ever use is get. So in this case, okay, let's see here. We want to render a template. So apparently, take this on faith for now. There's a service whose nickname is templating. Cool. So we can say this arrow container arrow get templating. That gives us back that object. And then we can say templating arrow render and pass it a template name. And this is actually passing it a name variable into that template. Down here, since we're rendering genus/show.html.twig, where does Symfony put its templates? Symfony puts its templates in an app resources views directory. So it's just a really, really simple mapping. So we say render genus/show. It's going to render app resources views genus/show.html.twig, and it's just going to pop out our name variable right there. Okay. So there was kind of like the big assumption on this page was that we knew that there was magically a service called templating. Actually, there's two assumptions on this page. One, how the heck are we supposed to know that there's a service called templating? And of course, you can always read the documentation, and I work in the documentation, but I'm one of the developers that like to be able to be like, but what if I didn't have documentation? Like, how can I actually pull through the code and figure out like what connects and how things are actually working without needing to go to an external resource? So assumption number one was that we knew there was a service called templating, and assumption number two was that we knew what methods to call on the templating object after we got out, because we don't know what the heck that object is right there. It's just this big kind of associative array black box thingy. So to figure that out, there's two different ways. But the go-to way is you're going to go back to that bin console script, the one we used earlier to start at the server, and we're going to run debug::container. And that's going to return us a very short list of over 200 useful objects, services that are inside of the container. And this is where you're going to find, if you went down far enough, the templating service, along with the class that's actually going to return to you. So this is like one of the really powerful things about Symfony's container. It's like this built thing. So Symfony knows at runtime exactly all of the services that you do and do not have in your container and exactly which classes they go to and all that. So again, like you'll read the documentation in reality, but if you want to, you can always just go to this list and search for log or template or something like that and see what matches. In fact, if you pass an argument here, so bin console debug::container space log, it turns into a search. And it'll like return you a list of everything that matches logger. And you can start looking at it that way. Like, hey, what's in my container? What are my tools? That might even be more useful if you're like joining like an existing big project. Like who knows like what years of work and your teammates and third-party bundles have put into your container. Might be all kinds of tools in there that you don't know about. So back in our controller, the way that you'll actually see templates being rendered in Symfony is via this shortcut, this arrow render. So instead of going out to the container and getting the templating object and calling render on it and doing all that, you'll just say return arrow, this arrow render. And I want to highlight that because this is a good thing and this is a terrible thing. This is a good thing because it's so much shorter. Starting Symfony, at least for my style, because I want you to know like the magic that's going on behind the scenes. I want everything to be clear what's happening behind the scenes. So this render function, that method, if you literally open up that class, all it does is go out to the container, get the templating service, and call render on it. Or actually, it calls render response, which like kind of puts it into a response object for you. But it's doing the exact same thing that you were doing a second ago. So when you start using Symfony, you'll use these shortcut methods because like, why not? It makes your life easier. But you know, stop sometimes and actually maybe look inside that base class, because that base class is just full of secrets. It's whispering to you like, this is actually what's going on behind the scenes. Like this is really what's going on. And now that you know that, templating is actually the way that you render templates, if you're somewhere completely different, like you're in your own custom service, or you are like writing a command line script and you need to render a template, you now know that it's done with the templating service. Because if you didn't know that, you're like over in some other class that's not a controller, and you go like, this arrow render, it's like method not found render, and you're like, I don't know what to do. But if you know that the templating service is actually the key behind rendering templates, then when you're over in this other class, you just have to ask, how can I get access to the templating object? Or how can I get access to the container? Because if I give you the container anywhere in your code, you know you can say container arrow gets templating, that's going to give you back that object. So Symfony really does nothing. The only thing that Symfony does, and even this you can pull apart if you want to, is that route controller response thing. Everything else that you think like Symfony does, it doesn't do. One of these services does that. Symfony doesn't render templates. This templating object does. Symfony doesn't talk to the database. There's a service called the Entity Manager that does that. So finding out what these services are and just kind of having that in the back of your mind, that just completely will unleash you and basically make you super dangerous. So another complaint we hear is, or at least I hear, maybe I listen too hard, is that Symfony is too big. Like it just feels like there's a lot of files and a lot of layers and all that kind of stuff. So this is kind of a bonus. So for people that have not used Symfony, this will make sense. For people that have used Symfony, this will make even more sense. So what is a Symfony app? So if Symfony is big, like how small can we make it? So let's think about this. What is a Symfony app? So first of all, a Symfony app is a set of bundles. Now I have not talked about bundles yet. For people that are new to Symfony, bundles are simply Symfony plugins. And the main job, I won't say the only job, but the main job of a bundle, like why would I use a bundle? Why would I bring your bundle into my project? Is because bundles provide my application with more services. So if you had like a sweet Markdown bundle and I need to render stuff through Markdown, I would install your bundle and boom, all of a sudden I have this service called like Your Awesome Markdown. And I can fetch that out of the container and start using it. So Symfony, first and foremost, is a set of bundles that primarily provide services for your container. It's also a container of those services, and it's a set of routes. And that's it. And based on what we just saw, you're like, that makes sense. Yeah, like routes would point to controllers, and then in the controller, we use some services maybe to get our job done, and then we go to lunch. That's it. There's no more. It's just these three things. And even number one is kind of a fallacy, right? Because number one is basically just there to give us more stuff in number two. So it's these three things basically. So let's create a brand new Symfony project from nothing. And this is actually like a little bit more advanced. Not in understanding what I'm about to do, but if you guys are going to start a Symfony project later or tomorrow, you'll start it the way that I did it before. You'll get like the nice project skeleton and all that. So creating a Symfony project from nothing. So literally empty directory. So let's spin up a composer.json file, and we'll require Symfony/Symfony at version 3. Cool. And of course, we'll run composer install behind the scenes, and it will download this and all that good stuff. Second thing, index.php. So the heart of a Symfony application is this class called the kernel. It's like so important that you never even look at it. But anyways, every Symfony project has a class called app kernel. And the only thing you really do in app kernel is actually kind of register the bundles. So when I bring in your third-party awesome Markdown bundle, the way that I actually integrate it into my system is I open this app kernel class and I stick it right there. So you'll see this file inside of any Symfony project. You just usually don't create it by hand because you did that nice Symfony installer thing and it gave you this nice skeleton and life is good to go. So you don't usually pay that much attention to this file. But now we have nothing, right? So we're actually going to create index.php and we're going to require Composer's autoloader so we get nice auto loading and stuff. And then I'm just going to create a new app kernel and make it extend Symfony's kernel class. Now when I do that, Symfony's kernel class, for the OO nerds in the room, ultimately implements an interface. And at this point, there's 2 abstract methods that we need to fill in. So when I have class app kernel extends kernel, these are the 2 methods that I need to fill in. Okay? But I'm not going to fill those in. Instead, I'm going to use a trait. How many people have used traits? Yeah, about half of you. Okay. So traits, we're new in PHP 5.4. And effectively, if you looked at this microkernel trait, it's just a class, basically. It has functions in it. And when I use a trait, it's basically a copy and paste of the functions from that trait into my source code. So if I looked inside of there and it had 6 functions in it, then by doing this, basically those 6 functions are in this class. So you can it's a way to almost reuse just little function things. So that's not really important to this, but I don't want people to be like, I actually had somebody ask me last week, they're like, why is your use statement inside your class? And I was like, oh, that does look like a use statement, doesn't it? That's trippy. Whoops, yeah. Maybe bad choice, PHP is the same word. So it's not a typo, actually. So as soon as I use this microkernel trait, it kind of changes the methods that I need to fill in. And all of a sudden, the 3 methods that I need to fill in are register bundles, and configure container. And you guys remember what a Symfony app is? It's a set of bundles, it's a set of routes, and it's a container full of services. So we've created 1 file so far, and all of a sudden we have 3 functions we need to fill in where we're going to specify the 3 things that are a Symfony application. And again, my goal of this, wait, one second, you lost me. Why are we going through this? I just want to prove how small can we make Symfony? If we boil it down to its small pieces, what does that look like? And I'll kind of help clarify when we see a bigger skeleton, where that's coming from and why. So let's fill in these methods. So the main, most core-ish bundle in Symfony is the framework bundle. So actually, you can even get smaller than this if you want to. Some other people in the community have made framework light bundles. But basically, you at least have to have the framework bundle. It plugs in the routing controller flow. Kind of sets up the very, very basics. So cool. So we registered just 1 bundle. Second thing, configure container. So inside of here, we don't need to do anything. We don't need to add any services to our container. Right? We're going to create as small an application as we possibly can. So if we had an empty container, that would be cool with us because we're just going to create a really simple app. Now, the one thing Symfony does force you to do, and the code looks like this, is to provide a cryptographic secret. It's just one of those things that if we remove and guess one for you by default, we can't do that. It's just, security is too important these days. So anyways, that's why even in a small app like this, you see this 1 line here, which is you kind of giving something. You're not even using this yet, but in the event that you do need a cryptographic secret later, you've provided it with one and Symfony hasn't given you one automatically. And if you are used to using Symfony, this is what you will see in your config.yml file under framework secret, some secret. So in Symfony, you can do configuration in any different format. So if you see a YAML file in Symfony, you can also do that same configuration in XML or PHP or anything else. So what you're actually seeing here is usually we use YAML configuration. So if you pull down a real Symfony project, there is an app config.yml file with stuff that looks like this. This is what the PHP version of that looks like. So in my super simple app, I'm trying to keep things as small as possible, so I'm just specifying this inside of PHP. And then the last thing is configure routes. Okay, so let's create a home page. Actually, not a home page. Let's create a /random/curly brace limit page. So it'll be /random/15 or whatever. And the first argument here is obviously the route, the URL. And the second argument here is the controller. And remember, the controller is just a function. And Symfony doesn't care what your function looks like. It could be a flat function, a method inside of an object like it usually is. It could be an anonymous function. It doesn't matter at all. So what you could probably put here, I've never actually tried this, I should. If you wanted to, you could literally probably put the string random action. And if you had a flat global function somewhere called random action, it'll call that. Symfony doesn't care. This is just a simple map. It's I don't know, when somebody goes to this URL, call random action, thanks. And then what do we do in random action? We return a response object. So it's really boiling it down to as small as possible. Now this syntax here is one that is actually a little more advanced. It's called Symfony's service syntax. what this actually says is go to that container full of useful objects and find a useful object called kernel and call a method called random action on it. And it just happens to be that like the app kernel class, when Symfony boots, it actually adds a service to the container called kernel, which points right back at your app kernel class. So it's kind of like a core service that's always there. So what we're doing is we're actually pointing right back at ourselves when we do this. So this is actually going to still be an app kernel, public function random action, $limit like always, and then what do? We just return a response. Symfony is a JSON response object that makes creating JSON responses easier. Not that it's hard, but there you go. We can all kind of figure out what that does behind the scenes. So that's it. All of that code was in app kernel. Bundles, routes, the services, and then the routes actually pointed back to a fourth method that we popped right inside that same class. And then at the bottom here, we're just going to basically instantiate that kernel, instantiate a request object, and these lines of code here basically tell your app to run. So these are like the standard 5 lines of code you'll see at the bottom of any Symfony application. It's like, okay, everything's set up, so like, run my app and get the response. So that whole thing actually works. And this is literally index.php. And if I did a built-in web server right now, the whole thing would run just fine. And this ends up, if you count composer.json, it's 2 files. Count the PHP file, it's just 1 file. It's 52 lines of code. And it is a full stack Symfony framework. Like the container is there, routing, controller, the event dispatcher, if you've used that before, like the whole darn thing is there in 52 lines of code. And of course it's fast as hell. But that's because we haven't added anything to it. So I put that up there because it like reads really well. You're like, yeah, it's fast as hell, But it's fast as hell because you haven't added any features to your application. So of course it's super fast. So the goal of this is not to create single file apps, but I heard Symfony is big, Symfony is big, Symfony is big for years, and it was like, no, Symfony is not big. We don't make people build things from scratch because that was actually kind of a lot of work, and you kind of need to know what you're doing to do that. But ultimately, it's bundles, routes, and controllers, and you can spin that down to a single file app if you want to. So as you do get to learn Symfony, what this means, and like my real goal behind that thing, and by the way, I'm not going to go back to it, that trait I used that made that whole thing possible, that's a new feature in Symfony 2.8. So this is a pretty brand new feature. So, the goal of this was for clarity, but also once you get to know Symfony, if you do have that smaller application, like, well, we just have this app and it's like a simple API or something like that, like you don't have to use something different. Sometimes it's like, I don't know if I want to like use Symfony and get the whole directory structure thing. Maybe we'll just use like Silex, for example, a micro framework built on Symfony. But anymore with this, like you don't have to. If you know Symfony well and you have like a really small problem you want to solve, then just spin up this 1 file yourself and solve it. And the advantage of that is you're still inside of your normal stack. Like you're really good at using Symfony already, and now you can just use smaller Symfony, but nothing changes. It's the exact same tech stack that you're used to working with. So there's no like adjustment to okay, what's different in this project because it's not exactly Symfony. It is Symfony. So my overall goal was just basically clarity and control. And I'm not going to go into that anymore. But if you guys want to see a realistic application with that, it's up on my GitHub page. And basically, you can start, because everything's in PHP, you can start doing some really cool things with configuration. You can do like if statements and do things with environments. And the whole thing ends up just being really, really easy to read. And this is where we actually kind of start building like a little directory structure and things like that. So instead of a single file app, we have a small-ish application. Other things, talking about like Symfony 3 in general, and just kind of things getting easier. So up until Symfony 2.8, which came out in November, Symfony security was basically impossible. I used to go to trainings, and if they had a custom security system, so I'm talking about authentication, like they had some custom way to authenticate their users, I would literally go to the smartest guy in the room or girl in the room, and I would be like, look, this security system you're gonna have to build, it's gonna suck. So what you do is lock yourself in the room for 2 weeks, figure it out, good luck, and then don't let anybody else look at the code. Because they're not gonna need to. Once you finish it, you're good. But there's gonna be like one sacrificial lamb that's gonna get this job done. And there's like a lot of nodding going on over here. So this is not true anymore. Like this was probably the last thing in Symfony where I was like, this really sucks. Like I would not expect a mid-level developer even to have a prayer at doing this. But this is out of the way now. Like everything else largely in Symfony. It's all much more. It's all very accessible. So real quick, the way this works, it's a new component called Guard in Symfony. So authentication is all about who are you, identifying yourself. There is authorization. That's a second part of Symfony, and that's not about who are you, but whether or not you have access. And I only bring that up because Symfony's authorization layer, is completely amazing. It's completely awesome. There's this thing in Symfony called voters, and if you have some custom thing where it's like, oh, I need to figure out if this user can edit this product, but oh my god, it's so hard because they might be the owner of the product, or they might be like part of like the group that created it, but like if it's past 30 days, then they can't edit it anymore. No problem. Use voters, and your code's gonna be super easy to write, super readable. So like that's already taken care of. Authentication, though, was the one that sucked. So new guard component, and it looks like this. It's basically an interface, and I'm gonna go through these methods quickly, kind of one by one, so you don't have to like, look at them really closely. But basically the idea was it's a single class that takes care of the entire authentication flow. So no matter like what crazy thing you need to do, you're just gonna go to this one class and basically answer all the questions for that. So it'd be like one class. If you're building a traditional login form, there'd be one class to build that. If you're doing API token authentication, create a second class. If you're doing social authentication, create a third class. Because of course, not all applications are like this, but a lot of applications you can actually authenticate many different ways. So just one class for each type of way that you can authenticate. Manual authentication, that weird proprietary SSO solution that makes no sense, but you're forced to integrate with, it's also just a single class. Where you like redirect and it like sets a cookie on a subdomain, anybody ever had to deal with that? Oh, I actually shortened this because I'm not talking about this too much. But basically, each of these methods, it kind of goes step by step by step by step. So get credentials is something where you basically go out and find your API token or your username or your password on your request object, and that's what you return from get credentials. Then in get user, you're past that same credentials you just returned. Maybe it's a username, maybe it's an API token. And your job here is just to go and fetch your user. So if you store your user in Doctrine, then just go query for your user. However you want to do that. Whatever weird query you need to make, go make your custom query. If you just want to create a user object out of thin air, then do that. So you create a user object here, then check credentials is where you check your password to see if it's valid. If you have one. If you have API token, there is no password checking, so you can just basically leave that empty. And then what happens if something goes wrong? What happens if authentication fails? Like I can't find the user on this step here. Well, then just fill in on authentication failure. And you return the response object that you want to send to the user, like a 401 JSON response or a redirect to the login page. You just do whatever you want there. Same thing on authentication success. Everything was good. So now what? If it's an API token authentication, we'd probably do nothing and allow the request to continue to the controller. But if it's like a form login, right, then we want to redirect them to maybe the last page that they were just visiting. And then the only weird one, just by name, is start. But this one's actually similar to failure and success. This one answers the question, what happens when an anonymous user tries to access a protected page? It's not an authentication failure, right? It's just how do we invite them to authenticate? It's called an entry point. Do we redirect them to the login page, or do you send them back like a 401 authentication needed or whatever?
Just got a weird name.
Yeah, it's got a weird name because it's part of a different interface. So that was the one name I couldn't change myself. Yeah, so that's why. Yeah, it's got a weird name. All right, so bonus round, Drupal 8, which I realized was in my talk title. Now it's going to make sense why I relegated it to all the way at the end. So Drupal 8 uses a lot from Symfony. Like Laravel uses a lot too, but in comparison to this, it's like a lot with air quotes. Drupal 8 really bit almost everything off from Symfony. The only thing that Drupal 8 doesn't have that Symfony has that's of significance is the bundle system. So, and again, bundles provide services. So Drupal has a different way for external libraries or packages to like add services to their container. That's the only like biggest difference. And there we go. This stuff over here, for example, so these are all the components that are shared. This is basically the Symfony framework. Yeah, even the bundle system is actually in this package. They just don't use that particular part of it. So let's create a page inside of Drupal. And it's going to be actually really, really familiar. So in Drupal, you have modules. So if you want to do something custom, you create a custom module. It's their plugin system. Okay. So right here, in the rest of my project is somewhere up here. I create a modules directory. I create a new dyno_roar directory. That's the name of my module. And then this is Drupal specific stuff. I need to add this dyno_roar.info.yml file. And that basically has a couple lines in it that kind of says like the name of my module. But that's it. So that's kind of Drupal specific stuff, but that's enough to basically create my module. So it's just a directory with a single file in it. And once you have that, you can just start adding stuff to it. Stuff that we are really, really familiar with already. So hey, I need to add a custom route, like totally custom page to my Drupal application. That's awesome. So what you do is you create a dyno_roar.routing.yml. So module name .routing.yml. That's kind of Drupal style. Kind of like you name things, files a certain way, and it like automatically kind of sucks that in. And then inside of here, we just bang out our route in YAML. So earlier we saw our route in Symfony via annotations, but you can also do routing in YAML in Symfony. And had we looked at that, it would have looked exactly like this. I could copy and paste this into a Symfony application and it would work. The routing format is exactly the same. Key parts obviously are path right here. So in this case, the dyno says /count. And then to specify the controller, which of course with the annotations, right, we didn't have to specify the controller. We just put the route right above the function that we wanted it to call. So just by being next to each other, we kind of saved us a step of configuration. Obviously not the case here. So you add a defaults key, and I actually took out most of the indentation to fit this. Defaults, and then this is like 2 spaces in, _controller, : and then you just basically put the full class name, : the method name. It's like super simple, like what function should I call? Well, call this function inside of this class. And that's it. And then this stuff down here is Drupal specific that deals with security. But basically these 4 lines here, that's just stock Symfony. So what does that roar controller look like? Well, again, this literally can be copied and pasted from a Symfony project. So we're going to put it inside this controller directory. Every modern PHP project, and I hope you guys all know this, but if you don't feel bad. You know, one of the rules is when you create a PHP class, your namespace needs to follow your directory structure. So that same thing happens in Drupal. They always start the namespace with Drupal, but after that, you basically follow kind of the directory structure here. You do dyno roar, then they set it up so you can skip source, and then it's controller. So your namespace is always going to match your kind of directory structure in there. But yeah, other than that, I mean, simple, right? Class roar controller, public function roar, because that's what I called it here. Passes at $count from the curly brace count, and what do we always do in our controller? Unless we don't, but we'll talk about that some other time. We always return a response object. Cool? And that's it. So Drupal 8 and Symfony share the request and response objects. We didn't talk about those much, but there's a request object, there's a response object. I don't talk about them much because they're simple value objects. And if you need to like know how to get the IP address from the request in Symfony, it's going to take you like 3 seconds of Googling just to figure out what method name that is on the request object. So Symfony has a request and response object. Drupal uses the exact same request and response object. It also has the exact same route controller response system, which we just saw. I mean, like copy and paste, exact same thing. We didn't talk about this, but it has the same event listener system. So if you want to like hook into things in Symfony or Drupal, you'll kind of register a listener on events. So even if you're not familiar with that yet, if you learn it in one of them, then know it in the other one because they're the exact same system. The service and container system. This is actually the most important one. I could have shown this if we had gotten into like creating our own services in Symfony and Drupal. It would have been the same thing. I would have been like, here's how you create a service in Symfony. So we have our own useful object and we want to put it into the container. I would have shown you the code in Symfony, and then I would have like changed slides to like what it looked like in Drupal, and the only thing that would have changed is like the header from Symfony to Drupal. It's copy and paste. It's exact same stuff from one to the other. So that's one that's really like the core and heart of things. So that's the one that's most important, that it's the same across the two of them. Other random stuff, like you can also list all the services. Like this, for me, in a thing like Drupal is an absolute game changer. So Drupal really, like when you start looking at Drupal, you realize that like all Drupal really is, not all, but basically, it's Symfony's route controller response system. And then they took the container and just jammed a whole bunch of content, CMS-related services in it, useful objects. So it's just Symfony with like a bigger container that's just ready to go for CMS-related stuff. So in Drupal, you can actually get a list of what all those services are. So for me, it's awesome. I was like, I don't know anything about Drupal 8 other than it's built on Symfony. So like, I went to a Drupal 8 project, and the first thing I want to know is like, what services do I have? Because that starts to tell the story of how the system works. And you just start guessing. You'd be like, I know Drupal has a translation system. I wonder how to use it. Okay, let me just list all the services and look for trans. Oh yeah, they have a service called like string_translator or something like that. I was like, that's how you translate things. Boom, 2 seconds, and all of a sudden I'm translating things inside of a Drupal app. And I have no business doing anything inside of a Drupal app. And of course, you can do the same thing, list all the routes. That's another really fun one. Every single page you look at in Drupal, it has a route behind it. So even including like the admin interfaces, right? There's a route behind that, and you can actually go and list all the routes. And when you list all the routes, they tell you what controller they go to. So I could be like on some weird admin page, and just for the heck of it, I can list all the routes, find out which one of those routes matches the page I'm on, and then it'll tell me what controller function it's calling, and I can open that up in the core code. Be like, what are you doing in here? And start messing around with the code in that page. You know, not obviously to like commit it, but as far as like reverse engineering things. So Drupal 8 is like super fun and easy once you know like the Symfony stuff to reverse engineer and see what's going on. The only thing it doesn't have is the awesome web debug toolbar on the bottom. Just kidding, it does. It's all good. It's on the bottom too. So yeah, you get all that goodness. You have to install that though. It's a module which used to be called Web Profiler. Now it's called Devel. Does that sound right? Looking at you guys that know a little bit more about Drupal than I do. Anyways, it's a module. So if you Google for like Profiler Drupal, and that is like absolutely the best thing. So now we're cruising around a Drupal app, and every single page in the bottom tells you like what route was matched, how long the page took, like how many cache hits they were. You can click into that, get a list of all the services. They'll show you all the events that were dispatched and the order they were dispatched, so you can start ripping apart things. Like this is why I know tons about Drupal, and I've never even remotely gotten close to deploying a Drupal application. So this is really the opportunity with our community, the modern PHP community kind of stuff. We're gonna have like more and more of these opportunities where we just accidentally start knowing more and more technologies just by like embedding ourselves in these core concepts of, you know, Symfony Composer and like other high quality libraries. So what I'm trying to say with all this is that Symfony behind the scene is quality first, magic second. And that's why it has that reputation, which I'm trying desperately to shake off because it's not hard anymore. Maybe it used to be hard, but Symfony is not hard anymore. But it's quality first, magic second, which not to do the exact opposite and like make it sound, but like Laravel is, it's not that it's magic first, quality second, but like they have a different philosophy. If you use Laravel, they're gonna put a lot of things like close to your fingertips so you can get it done. But it's gonna be maybe a little bit less clear why those things are happening. They're a little bit more magic. And those are both fine. Those are pros and cons, because sometimes in Laravel you can get things done faster, but if you need to extend it later, maybe there's a higher price for that. It's harder to figure out what's going on. So Symfony's philosophy is gonna go quality first above all else. We're also not gonna upgrade break your project when you upgrade, which is cool because we don't like getting angry issues either. And I actually upgrade my projects. How many people have like been on a framework before and you're like, new version, don't care, never upgrading because it's gonna break everything. Yeah, like everybody, right? Yeah, and that's actually increasingly a problem because of security things, right? Like 5 years ago, like there really wasn't security concerns 5 years ago, not like there is now. But increasingly, like, you know, not being on the latest and greatest with security patches is becoming more and more of a problem. So if you're blocked because your framework is breaking things, that's really shitty, to use a not so nice word. We also, in our boringness, or infinite boringness, have predictable release timelines. So there's a new version of Symfony every 6 months. There's 4 releases per big number. So this wasn't true for 2 because we went 2.0 through 2.8. But it'll be 3.0 through 3.4, 4.0 through 4.4, 5.0 through 5.4. So as long as Symfony lasts, like you can like shout out a version and we can like do the math and be like, 5.3, and we're like, yeah, it comes out in May of 2022. Like, that's just how it's going to be. So it's really boring and predictable. And the LTSs are the, starting now, they're the 0.4 version. So you get an LTS every 2 years. That gives you like 4 years of support and 5 years of security support or something like that. So it's just really predictable and boring. And that means that if you're on one LTS, then you have to, if you want to go from LTS long-term support to long-term support, then you'll have to wait for 2 years for the next one to come. But then you will have like a year or 2 of your old one still being supported for you to basically like make that jump. And remember, like, what does making that jump mean? It just means getting rid of your deprecation warnings so that you're not using the old code paths. And then you can just make the jump, no problem. And really, like, the theme of all this, which is fun for me to talk about, it's just fun for us all to pat each other in the back and say how great our futures are going to be, is that knowing Symfony makes you dangerous in other technologies for free. And that did not used to be the case at all 5 years ago when we really were framework-specific developers. And of course, like, my thing is, if you're going to go out and like run home and like tell your significant other about Symfony, even though they don't care, just remind them that it really is simple behind the scenes. When Symfony gets complex, it's because users make it complex. And it's not necessarily their fault, especially, when you're a junior, you don't know what you're doing, and like all of a sudden you realize you're so tangled up in things. So, for example, like Symfony's form component, now that we've basically fixed security, Symfony's form component is the most complex component in Symfony. It's also one that where most people, the longer they work with it, the more they go like, oh, I get it, I like that. Not in all cases, but usually you like come to appreciate it more. That being said, I will see people create these like elaborate forms with like embedded forms, the collection of embedded forms. It's like a big giant monster, and they'll work on it for 3 days, and they'll just be like debugging it forever. So it'll be like some weird validation error there, but it's like 10 levels deep in their application. So at some point, you just got to be like, you know what? I want to take this form that has 5 fields, and I'm going to write it in HTML, and it's going to be okay, and I'm going to get it done in 45 minutes. I'll still even use Symfony's validation service because that's not attached to the form component. I'll still even validate it correctly. So, things get tough. Like, don't hang yourself in your tools. Your tools are optional. Other than your route controller response flow, tools are optional. Yeah, that's it. That's like my creepy picture. And haha, there we go. Awesome. Well, thank you guys very much. Yeah, I'll leave that up. We do have, we just started banging out our Symfony 3 stuff for Camp University. We're like 2.5 screencasts into a series that's going to be like 9 long, and it's going to be awesome. And eventually we'll have coding challenges on there. And the first one is totally free. So if you guys want to get started in Symfony 3, the first one's like an hour long, and it's totally free, and it's totally awesome, but I wrote it some subjective. But hopefully you guys will think so. Any questions? Oh, my GitHub link from earlier? Yeah, I can go back to that. Whoop. Aha! Oh, I found it faster than I thought I would. Questions? Yes.
Talked about Drupal, talked about Laravel last time.
Mm-hmm.
About the dinosaur WordPress.
Oh yeah, WordPress is a really fascinating topic. Well, I mean, there's lots of things. Okay, so WordPress doesn't use any modern components. They also, for their greatest saving grace and their Achilles heel, is the fact that they've never, but depends on how you define it, broken backwards compatibility. So that's really one of the things that's made WordPress very successful. Is like from an early version, you could always upgrade and it wouldn't break things. But as a result of that, they're carrying around lots of like old crappy code, because if they like change that code, then it will break everybody's applications, and that's going to be millions and millions of sites. So like WordPress people will come to conferences sometimes, and they're just like, they're the total oddballs. They're the ones where like the rest of the PHP community is being like, we should upgrade our frameworks and require PHP 5.5 because 5.4 has already reached end of life. So like users shouldn't use 5.4, and so we should kind of like force it on them. And then like everyone goes down the line and says this. And then like the WordPress guy or girl stands up and says like, we support 5.2 and will for a long time. And you know what? Their user base is 10 times bigger than the whole rest of the room put together. So, they come from things in a really different perspective, and I think that's healthy a lot of times. Like it's easy for hardcore people to be like, let's require PHP 5.5. Those guys actually deal with real human beings out there. So as far as developing with it, like it's about the right tool for the right job. So if you're looking at like CMS or a blog, or even something that's like a little bit more complicated than that, and like WordPress feature-wise, like nothing touches it for solving the set of problems that it solves. And people that do develop in WordPress, they get really, really good at it. Now the downside is like one of the reasons that they can't modernize their code base easily is because it is spaghetti code. The nature of spaghetti code makes fixing spaghetti code harder. And like the reasons for that are like in the lands of object orientedness. But the fact that Symfony in 2.0 is like perfectly object oriented. It allowed us to do this thing where we don't break backwards compatibility and deprecate things. It's just not possible in WordPress. So I have nothing bad to say about WordPress at all. If it's the right tool for the right job, which it is in a lot of cases, then definitely use it. That help?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we've been looking at these back-end, a lot of these back-end frameworks for API.
Yeah.
And we've been concerned about performance. I know you said if you get a one-page file, you can do something fast. But what we've noticed is that when we looked at the performance scale of a lot of these frameworks, a lot of these PHP frameworks are coming in low on the totem pole.
Oh, as far as as far as like how fast they are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
as far as how fast they are. Like, so on a 100-point scale, I believe that Symfony 2 came in as a 0.2. Not even 1. So,
Like 100 being like, it was like a rating scale or something?
Yeah.
So, okay, so performance things are a problem. Ultimately, if you're gonna use object-oriented code, you basically can't get faster than that micro framework thing that I showed you before. The only reason that micro framework does nothing, basically. The only reason that micro framework will be significantly slower than something that's basically procedural behind the scenes is purely because of like the number of like classes that need to be like loaded behind the scenes to do that. But at this point, you're talking about the last like 0.1%. So like the difference between like what Symfony has to boot up and what like a flat procedural thing needs to load up. You're talking about like, okay, like we're trying to get our API response time down from like, 68 milliseconds to 67. So when you see like those performance metrics, like the problem is that you really are zoomed in to that last little tiny bit. You're saying like, what's everybody's benchmark? Well, this can return the page in 45 milliseconds. It simply takes 65 milliseconds. Like that's 50% longer. But in reality, when you actually build an application with it, you're actually going to be doing something more like, this is bad just to make it sound like everything's slow. But if you build an application with it and you weren't super worried about performance, then in both cases, it would probably take, let's say like the procedural one takes like 500 milliseconds and Symfony takes 510 milliseconds. So it's because you're zoomed in at this like low range of like trying to get that last little bit out of there that like makes things like look super fast or super slow. So what I'm trying to say is like, I basically think that those are BS. Your application is going to be slow because of the application code that you write. So we're kind of worried about that 2 milliseconds here. You're going to write code that takes 200 milliseconds. And all of a sudden, like that footprint thing that you see is never going to matter at all. By the way, when you get to the profiling thing, there's a service called Blackfire, which is awesome for profiling. If you haven't used it, it's blackfire.io. They have a free service. It's really, really awesome. But when I do that, like, you'll see where your actual problems are. So I would not avoid a framework because of that, else you're going to go down the hell of building your own kind of thing. Though, however, I'll say that if you build your own framework, basically, but you're using components of places, then there's not a problem. Using like, hey, let's grab these 2 components from Symfony, it's 1 component from Zen Framework, and let's put together just the basics that we need. Then you have to be a little more advanced to do that. But, like, that's totally okay to do that because then you're not like reinventing the wheel. And the reason that might be faster than like Symfony is just because you've actually gone through and started from scratch and elected the pieces you wanted. Whereas Symfony's standard edition we saw earlier is going to give you all the pieces. So you need to be smart enough then, if you really are trying to eke out the last bits of speed, to unplug pieces. You might be like, we're not using that bundle, so I'm going to unplug that and unplug that and unplug that. So yeah, it's kind of a long answer. We could probably do the speed test a different way and get Symfony to blow everything out of the water. What Symfony does behind the scenes for caching is absolutely absurd. So all of those, that entire service container we talked about. So when you put a service in the container, so ultimately, if I want a templating object, right? Ultimately, I could, if I use like some service, some library directly, I could say $$ templating equals new templating. I could just create a templating object and then just call a method on it and boom, I'm templating. So what the service container does is it just offloads that calling of the new line into a central layer. So you run around your application now and you just say like, hey, give me the templating service. And then some other central layer calls like the new templating for you. And every single container system works like this. Like Laravel's works like this, Silex works like this. It's just kind of the centralization of like that part of the process. And also, all the containers do things lazily. So that's one of the reasons that these things are so fast is they're obviously not creating those services unless you ask for them. but all of them do that. But Symfony does something that nobody else does, which is it figures out all this metadata. It goes, okay, like this is a big system, right? So we have like 100 services. So it's 100 different services, and like I know the first argument, the second argument. I know everything about the way these services are supposed to be built, and it's quite complex. And I even had to like run a whole bunch of read a whole bunch of configuration files to figure that out. It gets that all that metadata, and it writes down a single PHP class. So that ultimately, when you say this arrow get templating, sorry, this arrow container arrow get templating, it actually fires off raw PHP code that says like return new templating. So you end up with this container, which is basically like a 2,500 line container, which is exactly the container that we would all write by hand if we were trying to like basically write a container system by hand. So, and even does like things like it like remove services if it detects that they're not being used. Like there's ridiculous things that happen behind the scenes in Symfony basically to make it perform with any sizable system, which is how Drupal is able to use it. Because if Drupal didn't have a cached container, then the system would have hung itself right out of the box because it's just too complex.
Yeah, if I wrote it by hand, I'd probably indent things though. I wind up in there all the time with Xdebug, and it's just like,
Or totally indents things.
oh, it sure doesn't look like when Xdebug's running through it.
Yeah, or var/cast in the new one. Yeah. I won't keep you guys forever, but yeah, if you haven't seen it before, yeah, this is the actual file here. Let's go to presentation mode. It's possible.
I was all over it today.
So if you guys really were worried about like performance, like that micro way, that's basically, if you do the micro way that I showed, you're basically building your own framework at that point. And you got
Can we look at other things like they have Java ones and C++. We think about just going with different languages.
You could. I mean, honestly, like, you know, like why would you choose like one language or one framework versus the other? Like, as long as you're choosing something high quality. So if somebody came in here and they're like, hey, we're thinking about using like Symfony or like Cake. Like, come on, guys, use Symfony, right? Or if they're like, hey, we're thinking about using like PHP or Fortran, I'd be like, okay, hold on a second. But like, if you're using high quality languages, high quality frameworks, like, what's the biggest reason that you should choose one? Like, what's your expertise? So if you're gonna get more performance out of, if you figure out you're gonna get more performance out of like Ruby than PHP, and every single person in your office is PHP, like, as long as the owner's okay with that, cool. But that just, it smells of an expensive business decision to do that. So yeah, I mean, but obviously it depends on like if your entire business is based on like eking out like the last bits of performance, then you have a really good business case for doing something hardcore. Also depends on caching. If you're able to do HTTP caching, depends on how dynamic your data is. If you're able to actually cache the responses, then it's basically game over because you could write it in Fortran and it would be super performant if you had the caching layer in front of it. But if it's like super dynamic back and forth stuff, then you're not going to cache it. So anyways, this is actually the cached file that gets built. So Symfony builds that whole container thing and like literally writes this big giant PHP file so that when you say this arrow get templating, it ultimately runs that code. It literally just goes out and boom, it hits like the raw PHP code that you would have written somewhere if you were to do this all by hand. And if you've used like a different micro framework like Silex or like Laravel, like that's how you wire it up. You like Silex, you say, I have a service called templating, and when you want to instantiate it, here's the PHP code that I will write that you should run when you instantiate it. So in both cases, there's like PHP code being run afterwards. But this ends up being faster because it didn't even have to like build that big callable array. It just kind of dumps it out here. So yeah, sorry, that was a really long answer. You see, you struck a chord there. I was like, wow, performance stuff. All right, any other questions? Awesome. If anybody has any other questions, they can come tackle me. Yeah, thanks for coming out, guys. And I think we have more pizza and swag over there.
Sweet. Yeah, I was looking forward to getting into the authentication a little bit more.
I do have a presentation that I gave recently about the guard authentication specifically.
Yeah, I took care of
Oh, did you?
Yeah. We're having issues with a couple of our teams. Four of my teams here. And we had issues with authenticating, you authenticate through the app itself, and then also you can authenticate through a mobile. And every time I go there was no errors and things like that.
That's super duper complicated.
Yeah.
It used to be. Yes, I have another. So the new component. What version of Symfony are you on?
Remember?
Sure.
Yeah, so you guys didn't get updates at some point. 2.4 is at the end of life. Not that I mean, I know that not that it's like, oh my god, I didn't know. I'll go upgrade right now. That's great.
No, we're actually
Yeah.
you're right, man. Upgrading and doing everything.
Absolutely.
Nice.
Yeah. So
I
it's
mean,
like
like,
pretty,
it's
it's like,
so yeah. So that's what we decided to compare to what you guys had to offer. Try to make that decision.
It's a really good spot to be in. Like I said, if everyone in the room is a Ruby developer, then you got a really good business case to do it in Ruby.
yeah, we have, well, we have two
Java
different,
Symfony, like it's the highest quality framework.
the two
that's out
main
there.
ones.
Now, the previous developers might have totally forked the implementation of it, and that's what you're inheriting.
Is that an understatement?
But I mean, here's like one case that's already where like somebody's gonna come help you. You can actually upgrade that app,
So
and
pretty
you're
good.
probably not gonna break
That's a nice
anything or very, very small amount of things. Like one other thing.
Modern
Yeah,
service.
2.4 If something's gonna break, because occasionally they're like small things that happen accidental, it'd be in the form framework. So watch out for that.
yeah, we did that for a
But yeah,
while.
maybe upgrade 2.4 then cool, you're on like the latest and greatest new
I
stuff.
think we're
Now,
going.
No, that's what we're talking about,
That's all we did,
PHP
and then now we're going. Other
Do I have that up there?
imagine
I might have that up there.
Yeah, it was at least a sensation. Yeah.
I should stop this.
It's a lot of work. So, I mean, at the same time, like, doing it yourself is helpful because a lot of people.
I'm gonna look that up because now I'm curious what I was thinking before.
Yeah,
Sure enough.
like reading all the emails from.
See?
Oh, I was just. Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
I was gonna talk about, it, but yeah, I realized I kind of pimped it. I was like, oh man, there's like lots of stuff happening right now. Like this Drupal was out, Symfony was out, PHP 7 was out. I can see how that would read that. Actually, PHP 7, there's nothing like in my opinion, there's nothing to really talk about. It's super fast. Has some new features.
That's the problem.
You probably won't need those features. If you do, like, there's nothing that I've run up against yet where I've been like, darn, I wish this application was built on PHP 7 for this feature. Honestly, the biggest thing is like it's so blazing fast that I want to upgrade my apps to it.
Using automation scripts,
So
All things that we got to consider.
We're using it
Yeah.
right now. We went from a zero. We went from a
and that's what makes it.
hope
Glad you guys came out.
like rigorous creating process. Oh, the website works.
Yeah.
To now,
Yeah, right.
like
That was especially with one of
it's
the
gonna
old
get.
The job is the first
very
Symfony.
Yeah. It was like,
Yeah.
like,
That's why there's
like,
some stuff wrong.
Once you start like
I ran
Yeah.
into drawing problems.
well, that's what we just
A lot of
okay.
things.
So he's
a lot of trouble with
he's
documentation.
doing like manual testing and this goes.
Fortunately, where
just
you are,
give
Yeah,
us-
yeah.
We have a pretty common.
So I wanted to do
Sort
a
of a lot of surface area
localization
to cover. And so it's
with
like
defaulting to English or whatever.
So we're eventually probably do something.
Yeah,
Jenkins.
And, you know, I
Just got checked
found
out.
documentation on
there's
Symfony site.
there's a company
And they talked about, well, there's this special underbar locale.
Yeah.
And I put it all in and nothing happens, you know, make sure they can stick to it. I did, I have a listener on there and it's running and everything, but it's crashing and then I Googled some more and got, you know, give me a deep link into the Symfony documentation and it's like, use this JMS. This is actually on the Symfony site.
Yeah, no, everything you're talking about, I know exactly what you're talking about.
And so I went and found that, but it's like version 1.0 on the guy's website, and it totally didn't work at all with Symfony 2.8. And then I Googled it and found that he has like a new site for 2 point something, but there was no reference to it on the Symfony docs, which told you to go get that bundle.
Was JMS translation bundle?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the problem with the one that's on his site
Yeah,
is
we have
his
actually
design
just,
is
like,
some other requirements that just either like there was a metadata bundle that just couldn't be found. I don't know if you have to read on the packages or what. But in the end, I ended up having a really hard time. All I wanted to do was have a default route and localization. So if somebody went to /route without putting in a line,
Yeah, it's like, I didn't even realize how much.
odyssey for us.
Yeah.
And am I missing something there or what? I mean, I found that a lot of the
And then you're gonna translate stuff for that, right?
right. Well, I got that working. I got like the what is the name?
They've been there the whole way.
Excellent. Yeah. That's
That's
working.
great. That's the biggest.
That's no problem. I just wanted it. So
Yeah,
that if they went to the route with no language in there, they got my default language.
Yeah.
I'm fine. I found like 12
My
different
job
instructions
is
spread around Symfony documentation.
Yeah, I
Like,
prefer just write a wrap them all into a article. Honestly, part of that is because the author, me, I just don't have that use case that often.
Yeah.
So it ends up being covered, right? So it's classic things where you're like, the information was there, but it was like a little here and a little here and a little here. Nobody told me like the story.
Well, in the
Like,
end, it ended up being what seems to be the JMS translation bundle that finally saved me and got it working. I had an extensive about 5 weeks. Just finding that to have something to reference on the documentation. If you wrote it, I guess you wrote it.
I wrote it.
Yeah,
So it must have like
yeah, but then like if you Google for it, it finds his website, which only says up to 1.0, and he's